geologic history of the area. But then the inland seas come in, the dinosaurs came in, and we have a number of different formations. And I'm just telling you about the Mancus, first of all, the Morrison Formation. Now, Morrison, Colorado, over by Denver, that's where it's named, but it literally goes all the way into Utah and into New Mexico and up to Wyoming. It's a huge formation, and that's where we find most of the dinosaur bones. And then above that was a Dakota sandstone, which basically beats hard sandstone. And it forms the cap rock of the Uncompahgre Plateau. So when you look out at the plateau, that's literally what you're seeing is that hard stuff, because everything above it, the Mancus Shale, literally got eroded away. But what's so fascinating about this is that Uncompahgre uplift slowly moved out and moved out. And what happened is the rivers kept coming down, and the Mancus Shale just literally got washed away, and it went all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico, which is the next formation that are forming today. But anyway, so the Mancus Shale is almost all gone. Now, where we live here, it's still here. I'm standing on probably a fantastic dinosaur, but I don't know it because, you know, it's about 600, 700 feet down there, because the Morrison Formation is below me right now. But it's not exposed, you can't see it. But I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the Uncompahgre Plateau. Why? Because as that plateau slowly rose and rose and rose, and the canyon, Dominguez, Escalante, Undeweed, Cottonwood, Rubidoux, all those canyons cut in because they had streams, and they slowly come in, and they washed and exposed the Morrison Formation. So right underneath that cap rock, the Dakota sandstone, is the Morrison Formation. And on the sides of these canyons is where we find all the dinosaurs. And in some places, literally, that Dakota sandstone has gone completely away, and then you have just Morrison everywhere you look. But for the most part, it was because of that uplift that we're here today. Now, the Mancus Shale is the adobes, what we call the adobes around here. The Mancus Shale literally continued on in an inland sea, and the sea was huge. See this area here? At one time, that's about 100 million years, 150 million years ago, we had this inland sea. And so literally, the Mancus Shale, it goes, well, literally almost covers the United States. I mean, there were certain deposits in where this inland sea was. In Mancus, Colorado, which is over by Cortez and Durango, that's where they named the adobes, the Mancus Shale over there. But it literally covered everything else. Well, where the heck is it? Remember I said things were moving up, right? And then the San Juan Mountains, those are all volcanics. So they came up, and so everything got eroded away. But the Mancus Shale at one time was just a straight shot all the way to Mancus, Colorado, Cortez, Colorado. So it's gone. So what we're here today is because of the Mancus Shale. The Mancus Shale had all these, it's a sea, an inland sea. And you've got these sea monsters just going around and eating each other up and whatever. And so what happened was, I was a science teacher at Cedaredge High School from 71 to 75. And in 1975, I had some students that came up to me and they brought this bone that looked just almost exactly like this. And they knew I was fairly famous because I was the son of Eddie and Vivian Jones, who were, they were natural resources, living resources of Western Colorado for many years. But anyway, they both got dinosaurs named after them. They're very famous people. My mother, when I was teaching in Europe, my daughter came in and said, "Hey, Grandma!" She brought a world book. She never was Grandma, you know, a world book. So they really got around. But anyway, my students, two, Marty Tuttle and Jeff Shelton, were the two kids that brought this in, said, "Hey, what is this?" And I looked at it and I said, "Hey, that is a fossilized bone." And then they showed me where they found it, and I looked at it, and I could see that it was articulated. And by articulated, that means several vertebrae right next to each other. Well, when you find it articulated fossils, it's time to excavate, because that means there's probably a lot of the animal is there instead of just one little thing like this laying out there all by itself. There's no excavation possible. But what happened was Jeff said that they had a friend, Gary Thompson, actually showed them where they found it. And so this is where Gary Thompson comes into the picture. he literally located the site, and then they showed me, and so I went back, and so I've given Gary Thompson the credit for it, but there was another young man called Craig Slover, and Craig used to walk down the hill every day, to school, and he would probably find this bone, but he never mentioned it to anybody, nobody knew it, and as a result, he didn't get credit for the discovery. But the actual discovery went to the guy that I would, as soon as we brought in excavator and people like that, I had to give it credit to Gary Thompson. So there was a big hullabaloo about that, but I'm just trying to tell you that that's the situation. So once that happened, the Dry Mesa Quarry up on Uncompahgre, Jim Jensen, Dr. Jensen, or Dinosaur Jim they called him, he was excavating, but he happened to be at my parents' house that weekend. Because he used to come down on weekends. And so I went to my parents' house and I said, hey Jim, can't believe this, but we've got some articulated vertebrae up by the sea on Cedar Mesa. Would you come up and take a look at it? So he came up and he looked at it and he says, this is really a bad location. Why is it bad? The road is right there. Everybody and their dog is going to stop and start digging and going away. So we said, if we're going to do it, we better get it out and get it out now. So he stopped his excavation work up on the Dry Mesa Quarry, and that went for 35 years now. So he stops there, and for 2 weeks, we worked up there, and it was Rod Sheets and myself and Rod's brother Mike. Now Rod's the curator of BYU, and then Kit Statman, who was the curator, and Jim and I, the five of us, we worked for 2 weeks excavating it. I literally took 2 days off of my schoolwork. I told my principal, hey, this is a major. No, you take 2 personal days. I'm not getting any time off. But anyway, so I took 2 personal days. It kind of upset me. And so I helped excavate it, and we excavated. Now, when you excavate this thing, it's just like this skull right here. When I literally was working on the skull. It didn't look anything like this at all. It was totally smashed. I mean, the whole skull is maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick when we excavated it. And so I'm cleaning the teeth off and stuff like that. And then what we did is when we excavated it, then we would have to cover it with burlap, and then put plaster of Paris, and then we'd turn it over, put burlap, plaster of Paris, and then we'd have a nice nodule. Like this thing was just, this came out, the nodule about the size of this cake. And then it's all preserved, and then they take it back to the lab. And then we do that with the next section of vertebrae, and then the legs, we did it for the legs and so forth. So we had this, we preserved it. We did a good job of excavating it. But then it goes back to the BYU. Well, let me tell you, they got so much stuff backlogged up there, you can't believe it. The Dry Mesa Quarry, when we excavated up there for 35 years, you know how big BYU Stadium is? It's a monstrous football stadium. Underneath that football stadium, all the way underneath it, was all of these things that came from the Dry Mesa Quarry, and these great big white pouches of plaster of Paris and bone. And it's going to take them another 100 years to get all that stuff done. Well, it took almost 20 years for the mosasaur to get prepared. And it took 20 years just to get this guy, when they fixed this guy. And then once they got that one, it took another 5 years to get the rest of the animal. And then that's what the rest of the animal looked like. And now, Mike did his master. Mike worked up at the Dry Mesa Quarry. But Mike, I can't remember his last name. But anyway, he did his master's thesis on the mosasaur. And so he really knew a lot about it. And Mike came up here and he asked me where we dug it out. And I took it up there and I showed him exactly where we found it. And then he dug around and he needed to find fossils. Not just bone, but fossils. Because these fossils then tell them exactly how old that animal is. Because, everything is evolved. And in a certain area, these fossils just lived in this time period. These lived in this one. And so he was able to actually date the mosasaur based on his work by going up there and actually finding the fossils where I showed him where we excavated. So we got it back out, and then this was a big deal when we got this, and we thought this was all we were ever going to see. But then, about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, I don't know when did they finish the rest of the mosasaur. They've got it prepared now. And, you know, this was in the Delta County Independent talking about this talk. But anyway, they've got this prepared, just hanging from the ceiling up there at BYU. It's very spectacular. But you know, BYU has all kinds of different animals. You know, the Camerasaurus, that is mounted also at BYU. So they've got a lot of material up there. And you know, I just hope Rod Gaston, who I've worked with before, he's the one that actually makes the cast. This is not the original, this is the cast. We don't want the original. You know why? Just the original alone, just this piece here would weigh about 300 pounds. And then the rest of the animal, because it's all turned rock. It's not just soft bone like this. You know, just this stuff, you know, I can pick this up with my hand. And it's, you know, it's really light. No, so it's rock. And it's very heavy. So what they've done, they now, when they have it mounted there, they have all kinds of wires and everything like that. So they have the original mounted. They don't have a cast mounted there. But we'd really like to get a cast here for PioneerTown. That would be one of the things. Because this is rare. I'm a boy, you know, I grew up in Delta. And the Dobis, you know, I would go up in the Dobis on my bicycle, and then I'd look around, and I'd go dig to the Mangus shell. And I did find some big clam shells, about that big. That was my biggest find. But there's all kinds of little clam shells all over the place. But never, ever, ever did I find any fossil like this. And so the mosasaur is extremely rare, found in the deep sea. You just do not find these kind of fossils in the Mangus shell. You know, they basically, when a fish died in the sea, other fish would come in, eat it up, and the way it got just literally obliterated. But somehow this mosasaur, when it died, fell to the bottom of the ocean, of the sea, and then it must have been some kind of a flood or something, because you need to get it covered up pretty fast. In order to fossilize good like this, it needed to be covered up, and so it may have been a landslide or whatever else. Whatever, that got covered up, and then it got preserved. Well, so it's laying there. Well, 100 million years, that's a long, long time. Well, what's going on? Well, not just, you know, there's Mangus shell, then there's this Masonburg formation, Green River formation. All these formations are above it. And then we probably have a mile of sediment above where this guy was laying there. But then slowly, as the bottom left up, glaciers came down and they washed all this stuff out, and slowly it brings up. But it's still smashed, 100 million years of pressure. You can imagine what it's like. And so as a result, it didn't look anything like that when we excavated it. But now they slowly were able to put it together. And so that was the story of the mosasaur as we found it. Now I do have a little bit of extra time, so I'm going to tell you a few other. Any questions on the mosasaur?
So,
yes.
So what percentage of the full skeleton did you find up there?
You want the truth?
Yeah.
Well, kept secret. I've always told this to the people here in PioneerTown, the first group meeting. We found everything but the last part of the tail. There was one part of one flipper was missing. But the skull was there, most of the vertebrae were there in the skull. And when Jim was excavating, we ran into a problem. The tail goes back into the hill. It curls back into the hill. We got 2 weeks. He's got to get back up there. So he said, Dick, we're going to stop right here. So the tail is still going into the hill. So part of that mosasaur, 2 or 3 feet of it, is still in the hill up there. You know, I'll tell you where it is. You know where the sea is.
Right.
And then if you come just down the road just a little bit, there's a little road that goes up the hill, an old road. And below that road, there is a little a dead cedar tree. And then there's just a little bit of a slough right there. Right there where that slough is, that's where we excavated it. But the same thing that happened with Dry Mesa Quarry. 35 years they digging. Did they run out of bone? No. They ran out of room. Overburdened. They can't tunnel in, and as a result, in order to continue the excavation, they had to remove tons and tons and tons of overburden to continue digging for dinosaurs. So that's what happened with the mosasaur, and that's what happens with this. So it's actually Rod Gaston, I'm not Rod, but Mike, when he wrote his master's thesis, he said there's really about 3 feet. It's probably 38 feet long. This animal is probably 38 feet long. by the time you look all the way tail. And what they did is there's other mosasaurs that they found, so they just took casts of the other mosasaurs, put it together, and so that was how we treated the mosasaur. Okay?
So if we're out driving around, what signs, whatever, delineate Morrison Formation versus some of the other things? What do you look for?
You know Dobie.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a formation. That's
Right.
called the Mancus Formation.
Right.
Down below the Mancus Hill, you go out to the Uncompahgre Plateau, and you have what we call the Dakota Sandstone. That's the cap rock.
So if you go down Escalante Canyon.
Yeah, if you drive down Escalante Canyon, you look up at the sides.
Right.
Okay, you see that real hard Dakota Sandstone up there. And then right below that is the Morrison. That's the Dinosaur Formation. And that Dinosaur Formation goes all the way up.
Different colors?
Yes, it's usually purple and greenish color for the most part.
Okay, the Morrison.
And white, the Morrison is. But it's right below that cap rock. And the Morrison, now, and actually you don't find any dinosaurs right below the cap rock. For the first maybe 50 feet you don't. Then that's when the dinosaurs in our area existed. And they're all the way down to a red sandstone. There's a layer of red sandstone that the Morrison goes from there up to about halfway up. That's the formation that you're looking for to find dinosaur bone there. Now, in the adobes, forget it. You're never ever going to find something like this because it's so rare. It's the only one that I am aware of, and on the western United States, this is probably the only one that's been found. Now, in other areas, they find a few more, but not here. So it's amazing that we found it.
Right.
It really is. And so it's a real coup de grace for PioneerTown to have this here. And it didn't just happen. We worked with a few people to make this happen. Way back, that happened a long time ago, and they're still working on it. Okay, now let me just tell you a few more things. Are you any questions more on the mosasaur?
What year did you dig up the mosasaur?
1975.
It was 70.
Yeah, 75.
It must have been the fall because I don't remember.
Yeah. And so it's been quite a while. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about my parents and the Dry Mesa Quarry. They found a funny-looking bone, about 3 times as big as this. And they were hunting for arrowheads. They were looking for the bone. And they found it, and they brought it back down and set it on the porch. And then Dr. Jensen, who helped excavate the mosasaur, he's been working on the quarry. He always stops by and sees what they found. He wasn't working at the quarry then. He started the quarry. He found it. He said, "You know what this is?" Again, I have models in my truck, but I didn't think I was going to do this. Anyway, the bone is about this big, about that round. And he said, my mother, Vivian, you know what this is? He said, "No, it's a dinosaur bone." I said, "No, it's not just a dinosaur bone. It's just a little piece right here of the claw." And it was that big, huge. How can you have a hand that big with this little bone that's 3.5 to 4 inches in diameter? He said, "Take me up there. I gotta go. I gotta find this. This is unbelievable. We've never found this before." So they literally got in the Jeep and they drove up to the Dry Mesa Quarry. Or no, it wasn't the quarry, there was just a hill. And Mom, Dad showed him where to find it. And he started taking his pick and I got, "Oh, there's more here, there's more here, there's more here." And that led to 35 years of excavation of the Dry Mesa Quarry. But this thing was so big, and I was in Europe at the time, but I'm reading about it all over because they called it Supersaurus and Ultrasaurus because it was so big. The bone, if you go to the Jones Gallery in Delta, you'll see one of the leg bones, and it's 10 feet tall. And that was part of what the Supersaurus looked like. Now, you really want to see the Supersaurus? Go to Lehi, Utah, right outside of Provo. Supersaurus is mounted. And there's a plaque of my mother right there, and it says Supersaurus Viviani. And they've got that whole thing. And the curator of that museum is Cliff Miles. You know Cliff? He was a little boy when my mother taught him how to teach dinosaur or find dinosaur bones. And he's now the curator of that museum. And the little Sheets boys, Rod and Mike, they were little kids when they came up to the quarry and Mom showed them how to find dinosaur bones. So it's just amazing how these little things work out. Now the Camarasaurus, what happened is we found, my dad was looking for dinosaur bone in Escalante, Bridgeport. You know where Bridgeport is? It's going to Grand Junction. There used to be a rickety old crossings, and you could drive a Jeep across at that time. Now they won't let you do it anymore. But anyway, Dad crossed that, and then we looked for dinosaur bone because we go up to the Wingate Sands, the red rock, and get above it, and then the Morrison. So we'd climb up in the Morrison, and Dad found about 5 articulated vertebrae in the ground. He said, wow, this is something. So we contacted Jim Jensen. Jim Jensen came out and he said, wow, this is the site. So they had to build about a 15-mile road into that site. And they excavated it. And the dinosaur, it was just like this dinosaur lay down and died. And it was almost completely, 100% complete. It was just missing one thing, the skull. The skulls are the hardest things to find because they're the first to go when an animal dies. Even today, when you're looking up in the hills and you find a dead deer, mostly the skull is gone. You know, and animals will drag it off or whatever else. Anyway, the skull was missing. So they had a picture in the Delta County Independent that Jim just drew it. But looked like they had, but it was actually the last vertebrae that they found in this thing. But the the Camarasaurus, that is now also mounted in BYU at Provo, Utah.
And what is Camarasaurus?
Pardon me?
What does Camarasaurus look like?
Camarasaurus, yeah, Camarasaurus.
What does it look like?
It looks like I have all these little dinosaurs in my truck. Camarasaurus, you know what a brontosaurus looks like, or a brachiosaurus looks like? It's smaller, it's toned down, it's lower to the ground, and it doesn't have as long a head and as long a tail. And it's probably, it probably stood about a story and a half high. And, you know,
Big enough.
the brachiosaurus, brontosaurus, you know, they were 3-4 stories high. But this one here, and this ultrasaurus is 5 stories high. Literally, it's huge. So anyway, that was how that happened. And Jim realized that it was very important. And he excavated the number of sites. But let me tell you this, every place, you know, the Smithsonian, we have one in the Smithsonian, we've had it for a long, long time. First thing that's really got us started, we found that. And what happened is when we found it just across, about from here to that rail out there, somebody else's claim state, we were going to get rich, we were going to find uranium. This was during the U-boat day. Charlie Skeen, you know, he made his millions. We're going to get rich, you know, we put both Delta. So there's a claim stake right there, and Dad had a Geiger counter, and we got it. So we started digging this thing out, We uncovered a 7-foot humerus, huge diamond, you know, it's bone right here. But it was cracked, like I said, you know, all broken up and stuff, and the center was just almost virtually disintegrated. And we saw that claim stake. Hey, somebody else has probably located this area, but they don't get claimed for it. So we literally took that. Dad wormed his deep down. We took all of those little pieces, they're probably 50, 60 pieces. Some of the pieces were this big, and they weighed about 150 pieces, 150 to 150 pounds. But most of them were about this big, and they just weighed, you know, 30, 40 pounds. So we loaded all that in the back of the Jeep, drove it to Delta, unloaded it, and it laid out there for about a year. And when I'm 13 years old, I said, you know, we need something to do this. My dad owned a lumberyard. So I got a bunch of little rocks and stuff, and I put this thing together and was looking at the grain, and I was able to figure it, and I literally was able to lay out that 7-foot bone. But it was just cracked, and I never glued anything together, you know, and I had everything pried up. Well, Jim came through town one time, and he said, oh my God, where'd you find that? And he told me. And so he went to the Smithsonian Institute, and he knew the people back there, and he said, hey, you need to go out there in Western Colorado, they got a bone as big as I've ever seen. So Peter Vaughn, John Hott, those people, they came out to the Smithsonian. They looked at it and they said, wow, we'd love to have that. We donate, everything we have, we donated. We don't get money off it. It costs us money to find that. But anyway, so they came out, they packed it up, and they shipped it to Washington, D.C., prepared it, and then they put it on display. And it was in, for a long, long time, 10, 15 years, when you walk into the Natural History Park, there's this great big dinosaur bone, 7 foot long, and there was a sign, if you've never touched a dinosaur bone, touch this one. Billions of people have touched that bone that I put together when I was a little kid.
So I was gonna ask you, when you're packaging it up, with plaster and taking it out.
Uh-huh.
How do
Oh,
you?
we didn't do that with this boat.
Oh,
We just took it out of the
You just took
ground.
it
There's just a
off.
whole bunch of rocks, the whole center disintegrated.
so how did you document? Do you take pictures of it?
No,
To
not
figure
this,
out?
that's real early in the game. This is
Did you put
uranium.
sort of numbers on it or something?
Nothing, that's what I said, I was a little kid.
So you
I
just-
got plenty of time and I just looking at the grade.
So you just had a
Big giant jigsaw puzzle.
A good mind.
puzzle.
Yeah,
A
three-dimensional
puzzle put
puzzle,
together, right,
three-dimensional
okay.
puzzle.
Right.
And see, as you see where this is inside, you can look at the little grains and, oh,
Okay.
that goes, that doesn't, you don't turn this piece upside down. You just, oh, that has to go there, and this little piece, oh, that has to go there, and then we're missing a few pieces here. But, and in the dungeon, in the exhibit, they made a cast of it, and it shows that whole missing center. It's almost all gone, but there are a few pieces that hold it together, and so that's what they were able to do.
But
We
what you're
didn't
doing
excavate
is
it properly.
actual excavation.
This is a true excavation.
Right, so
Yeah, this is a scientific excavation.
you're photographing, you're putting some
Take
sort of
pictures,
a numbering
we
sequence
write,
on it or
we
something?
write numbers down on every block we take, we write numbers down, and so we know exactly the location of where every piece came from. You draw a map, you have a map, a planning map, and then you draw.
You- So did they put a grid up there? So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
could tell-
grid, you have a map with grids, and then you write down exactly where you found it. So that's professional, remember, we're a bunch of amateurs, amateur uranium prospectors, so we didn't do that. But then once that bone hit, then we got famous. Okay, folks, anything else? I'll be glad to answer any other questions.
Okay, interesting, thank you.
Wow.
Thank